Greetings. My name is Lamar Johnson, and the Old Testament theme that I chose to write about is the faith of the patriarchs. God's timing is like no other. At the same time that I'm taking this class, I'm also a part of a teaching cohort at the church that I belong to that is focusing on members that are 55 years and older. We do a noonday Bible study, and this noonday Bible study allows those members to come to church during the day where it's light, because it gets dark outside and they don't like driving at night. So, those of you who are young, you'll understand that issue pretty soon. And we spent the last 15 to 17 weeks teaching from the theme, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, a legacy of faith. When we're done with this series, we're going to move into Joseph, and it's going to be called The Faith Continues. The idea is to allow these seasoned saints, if we will, these seasoned members of the church, to know that even though they are at retirement age or they have retired, they still have work to do for the kingdom. Retiring from the workforce does not mean your work is done, and we want to keep them engaged and connected, because we're supposed to be doing this kingdom building until the day we take our last breath. The faith of the patriarchs is a rich theme that connects the Old and New Testaments in profound ways. Faith is a central theme that ties together the Old and New Testaments, and the patriarchs of Israel, particularly Abraham, stand as a pivotal example of what it means to trust God. The book of Hebrews celebrates their faith, emphasizing how they acted on God's promises even when fulfillment was unseen. I'm going to explore the theme of faith of the patriarchs, focusing on Hebrews 11, verses 1 through 19, a passage that highlights their obedience, trust, and forward-looking hope. We will consider the Old Testament backdrop of this theme, the New Testament development in Hebrews, interpretive challenges, and practical applications for teaching or preaching. The Old Testament presents the patriarchs as exemplars of faith. Their faith was characterized by obedience to God's commands and trust in his promises, even when circumstances seemed impossible. Some of the key moments include Abraham's call and covenant in Genesis 12, 1 through 3, and 15, 1 through 6. Abraham left his homeland, trusting God's promise to make him a great nation despite being childless at the time. God said, "Go," and Abraham went. He went with his father, his wife, and his nephew, and he just left. The birth of Isaac in Genesis 21, 1 through 7 is another example. Abraham and Sarah trusted God to fulfill his promise of a son even in their old age. It was said that Sarah was barren, and even being barren, they trusted God. She laughed at him a little bit, but she still trusted. Then the sacrifice of Isaac in Genesis 22, 1 through 19. Abraham's willingness to sacrifice his son demonstrated his ultimate trust in God's faithfulness and power. I have one child. It's a boy. I lost a child. It was also a boy. I don't know, even with the faith that I believe I have, that I would sacrifice my son right now. So what Abraham did is pretty strong. Faith in the Old Testament often involved acting on promises that would only be partially fulfilled in the patriarchs' lifetimes, pointing toward a greater future fulfillment. The exegesis of Hebrews 11, 1 through 19. So Hebrews 11 begins with a definition of faith. It says, "Now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see." This hope then recounts the faith of several Old Testament figures, with a particular focus on Abraham in verses 8 through 19. In verses 8 through 10, Abraham obeyed God's call to leave his homeland and lived as a foreigner in the promised land, looking forward to the city with foundations whose architect and builder is God. Verse 11 and 12, Sarah's faith is highlighted in trusting God to provide a child despite her barrenness. In verses 13 through 16, The patriarchs acknowledged they were foreigners and strangers on earth, seeking a heavenly homeland. And then in verses 17 through 19, Abraham's willingness to sacrifice Isaac exemplified ultimate trust, believing God could even raise the dead. The author of Hebrews employs several methods to integrate the Old Testament. He uses typology. Abraham's life foreshadows the faith required of all believers, culminating in Christ. Allusion. References to Genesis stories demonstrate continuity between the Old and New covenants. He uses eschatological reinterpretation. The promises given to Abraham. He promised him land. He promised him descendants. He promised him that he would be blessed. All these things are shown to have a greater heavenly fulfillment. Hebrews interprets the patriarch's faith as forward-looking, not just toward earthly promises, but toward ultimate fulfillment in Christ and the better country of heaven. You find that in 11:16. The central message of this passage is that faith trusts in God's promises, even when fulfillment is unseen or seems impossible. The patriarchs lived by faith, demonstrating obedience, perseverance, and hope in God's ultimate plan. Some of the key interpretive issues include the heavenly city. How does the concept of a city relate to the promises of the land in Genesis? Hebrews shifts the focus to an eternal inheritance. And there's the sacrifice of Isaac in 11:17 through 19. Abraham's belief in resurrection reflects a deeper understanding of God's power and faithfulness. Hebrews highlights the tension between the already and not yet aspects of God's promises, encouraging believers to emulate the patriarch's faith. The big idea: faith trusts God's promises even when fulfillment is unseen or long awaited. They start off by defining, in the teaching preaching outline, if you will, we're going to start off by defining Hebrews 11:1 and 2. We'll explain the biblical definition of faith as confidence in God's promises. Then we'll illustrate with examples from Abraham's life. After that, we'll highlight Abraham's obedience in leaving his homeland and trusting for a son. We'll show how faith involves both trust and action. We'll emphasize Abraham's willingness to sacrifice Isaac, trusting in God's power to fulfill his promises. We'll connect this to Christ's ultimate sacrifice. Then we'll discuss how the patriarch's faith looked beyond immediate promises to eternal fulfillment in Christ. Encourage believers to adopt a forward-looking faith. Some of the application will encourage trust, reminding believers to trust God in seasons of waiting or uncertainty. Challenge obedience, because faith requires action, even when outcomes are unclear. Will also inspire hope. Will point to the ultimate fulfillment of God's promise in Christ and eternity. The faith of the patriarchs, as portrayed in Hebrews 11, serves as a timeless model for believers. Their lives demonstrate that faith is not merely belief, but active trust in God's promises, even when fulfillment is distant or unseen. As modern believers, we are called to emulate their faith, looking forward to the ultimate fulfillment of God's promises in Christ. God bless you.